Good morning. Do we need a break? Are we all okay? Yeah, we're here, alive? Okay, great. All right, thank you very much to the Muktaa Charitable Foundation for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to see a full room on a Sunday morning. Um, I've been given a very tough mandate. I have 40 minutes and I have to cover a legislation which has over 120 provisions. Normally when I do this, first of all, English chalega, English Hindi is fine because I don't know Marathi. English is okay? Yeah? Okay, cool. Yeah, so I usually take at least a day, preferably 2 days when I do a workshop on the Mental Health Care Act because there are so many things which are packed into this legislation. There are clinical concepts, there are rights-based issues, there are regulatory concerns, there are all kinds of issues which are covered by this legislation. And of course, there is the historical context, the philosophy behind the act, what is it trying to achieve, where is it originating from. So I obviously cannot cover all of that in 40 minutes. What I will try and do is cover some of the basic principles, which I think all of us as practitioners, as people with lived experience, as caregivers, and as mental health professionals should be aware of. And hopefully this will initiate a conversation because I think law and policy is one of those things which are usually, it's very difficult to access for laypersons, right? If you've not got a training in law and policy, it becomes very difficult to actually pick up a legislation and understand it. So I'm hoping that this session of 40 minutes will initiate a conversation, will pick your interest. At the center, we've developed a range of resources on the Mental Health Care Act, which hopefully the organizers will share with you online. And that will definitely answer a lot more questions that you have, but we will try and get to as many answers that we can in the next 40 minutes, okay? If at any point you don't understand anything, it's becoming too difficult, it's too dense, you need a clarification, please stop me. I like to keep this interactive because otherwise it gets very boring. I can only keep it as interactive as I can in 40 minutes, so it'll be a mix of a lot of me talking, but I have some questions for you as well. So the first question is, what are rights? Okay, and why must we talk about rights when we talk about mental health? Yeah.
So rights are basically the things which is like you want it, it's your, you know it. And when it comes to mental health or psychology, it's like no one is allowed to take your peace out of you.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
you who build it, it's yours. And when it comes to legal rights, I feel no one is supposed to be toxic to you, no one's supposed to get that peace out of your life, the life you made for yourself.
Yeah.
And you should have a legal right for it.
Yeah.
You gotta fight for what you have and you have built
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
yourself.
Excellent.
Thank
Excellent.
you.
So what I'm hearing you say is that rights are all about a sense of dignity, of respecting an individual's dignity and their autonomy, right? So their freedom over their own life, my right to choose and make decisions for myself and live the life that I value the most for myself, right? Okay, anybody else? What are rights and why are rights important in the context of mental health? Yeah, go ahead.
Maintains a certain standard of living because you're giving away a lot of freedom when you're living in a democracy. So they are entitled to give you some freedom, some autonomy to maintain a standard of living and then just go above it.
Excellent, excellent. So as human beings, we have certain needs, right? We have certain requirements, some basic fundamental freedoms that we need to live our life. And these fundamental freedoms can also be called rights because the idea is that as a human being, I have a right to this because if I don't have it, then I will not be able to live a dignified, meaningful life for myself, right? So when we talk of rights, we also talk about these fundamental freedoms, we talk about these fundamental things which are required for us to live a meaningful and dignified life. I'll take one more response. Inclusivity, excellent. So, rights also means that we cannot discriminate between human beings on any characteristic which that person does not have a control over. So, for instance, caste, gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity, class, language, culture. There are so many other kinds of criteria, including disability and my mental health, right? So it does not matter whether I have a mental illness or I have an intellectual disability or I have a physical disability. As human beings, we are all equal, right? In the eyes of the law, at least we should be equal in the eyes of the law, that the law or other people in society cannot treat us better or worse because we belong to a particular group or community, right? So inclusivity or not discriminating against individuals, not denying them their autonomy, not denying them their basic fundamental rights which they need to live a meaningful life, right? Ensuring that everybody has access to the same kinds of rights, right, is the idea of inclusivity and discrimination and rights. Excellent. Yes, it is. At the end of the day, rights are a tool to achieve social justice. Right? And what is social justice? We can take a whole day to discuss that, but do you want to take a shot at it? Yeah, excellent. So the idea that, again, all human beings, all groups, all communities in society are equal. But the fact that in our society there will always be some groups and communities who will be treated unequally or have an unequal status in society because of historical marginalization, because of economic inequality, because of social inequality. So the idea of social justice is how do we bring everybody on the same plane when people's starting points are very different. Right? So how do we support those who have been historically marginalized, who have not had access to the same kinds of rights, who have not had the same kinds of privileges because they were not born in a particular caste or were born with a particular gender or sexuality that they have always identified with from their birth, or have not had a disability or a mental illness. Right? So thank you for that. Okay, so I've already spoken about that. One thing that I want to say is that when we talk of rights, one answer that has not come is that, yes, we all have rights. But every time there is a right, it also means that there is a corresponding duty on somebody else to protect that right, to fulfill that right, right? And so in our society, when we talk of who has a duty, fundamentally we all have a duty as citizens to respect each other, right? To not violate the other person's rights. But then there's also the state, there's the government, right? There are officials, and there are mental health professionals also who have duties, right? Because even as mental health professionals, we are in a position of power that we can exert over others, that our actions can impact their sense of well-being, can impact the kind of rights that whether they're actually being able to enjoy their rights or not, can impact their sense of dignity, right? So in a democracy, in a rights-based society, everybody has a duty to protect each other's rights. But when we look at law, we look at policy, we look at more specific stakeholders, more specific actors like the government or mental health professionals in this instance, who have very specific duties to protect the rights of persons with mental illness. Now, when we talk of rights, there is a global international law framework, right? So you might have heard of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil Political Rights. These are all international treaties, which basically lay down what are the basic fundamental human rights of all citizens or all human beings across the world. So that's an international framework, but even when we come to domestic law or domestic countries, we have different kinds of legislations which protect rights. So can you give me an example? What's the supreme law in India which protects our rights? Excellent, Constitution. Can you give me examples of some other rights which protect, some other laws which protect our rights? एक तो है, दो तो laws तो उसी पे हैं, but can you give me other examples? Right to Education Act, excellent. Anything else? Right to information, excellent. Right to liberty. Which law protects the right to liberty? Fundamental rights are in the Constitution, so that we've already covered. I'm asking for specific laws which protect certain kinds of rights or recognize certain kinds of rights. Mental Health Care Act, yeah? Yes, Right to Education Act, we've covered that. Right to freedom. Where is that? Where is that? It's in the Constitution, right to freedom, right? Article 21. We have a right to life and personal liberty. Right to employment, NREGA Act. Right to Food Security Act. Huh? Right to property. Do we have a law which recognizes the right to property? You're right, in a sense. Okay, give me an example of a law which protects, say, the right to property of women in India. Hindu Succession Act. A few years ago, the Hindu Succession Act was amended to say that all women have a right to equal property in their ancestral property. And it's just not the brothers or the sons who have a right to it, right? So, good example. So there are different kinds of legislations which protect different kinds of rights, okay? Okay, we've already covered this. So there's the right to food, work, education, mental health care. There's the right to enter into my own, to make my own decisions, right? As adults, particularly adults, people who are above the age of 18, we have a right to enter into a contract, right? If I want to sell my property, or I want to buy property, or I want to get into a financial relationship with somebody, I have the right to enter into a contract. Any instances of people who are denied certain rights, like the right to enter into contract? Can you give me an example? Huh? Below 18, okay. Anybody else? Sorry? Insanity and unsound mind. Okay, excellent. What is insanity and unsound mind? Are they the same thing or are they different? Is insanity the same as unsound mind? You want to explain what is unsound mind? Okay. Okay, fine. Anybody knows what is unsound mind? Okay. If a person has a mental illness, let's say they have schizophrenia or psychosis, does that mean they're of an unsound mind? Yes? How many of you say yes? The person is of unsound mind. Okay, how many of you say no? Come on, you can't be on the fence. You have to take a position here. Ye nahi chalega. Huh? By the Mental Health Care Act, what? That they are of unsound mind. How many of you agree with this? How many of you agree that the Mental Health Care Act says that if a person has a mental illness, say like schizophrenia, they are of unsound mind? Okay, yes? How many ayes? Please raise your hand. Okay, how many nays? No? A lot of fences here. Nahi chalega. Yeah.
Sir, the unsound mind is not clearly defined.
Who is speaking? I can't.
Yes.
Yes.
The unsound mind is not clearly defined.
Unsound mind is not clearly defined. Okay, but that's not the answer to my question.
So, the ability to take a rational decision, which is that if someone is offering me 1,000 rupees, and will I take it or no? I mean, it's a simple, practical, and if I'm of an unsound mind, would I really give away money to everyone if I'm meeting on the road? I'd say that is a... I'm sure it's much more elaborately defined in a legal framework.
Yeah. It's not. So the gentleman there is correct. Unsound mind in Indian law has not been defined. Yet the courts and the laws have repeatedly used this phrase, and the courts in their judgments have repeatedly invoked unsound mind. But the truth is that it's actually not defined. There's only one definition of what is a sound mind, and that is in the Indian Contract Act. And what does that definition say? It basically says that a person of sound mind is someone who can understand the rational consequences of basically entering into a contract. Right? So we can surmise from that that a person of unsound mind is somebody who does not understand the rational consequences of a decision that they're likely to make. Now, the Mental Health Care Act very clearly says, and I don't have the provision up here because I had only 40 minutes, so I could only put some things on the slide, is that mental illness is not the same as unsound mind. These are two completely different concepts. Mental illness, and this is important for you to know as practitioners, because I don't know if there are psychiatrists in the room, but a lot of times the courts will send cases to a psychiatrist saying, can you please tell us if this accused or this person is of unsound mind? And then the psychiatrist has to give a certificate saying, yes, they are of unsound mind. The Mental Health Care Act is very clear. Section 3 of the Act, that mental illness is a medical concept, which only mental health professionals or health professionals can determine. Unsound mind is a legal concept, which only a court of law can decide. So when a case comes to a court, it's the judge who will, based on the facts of the case, will decide whether this person is of unsound mind or not. So psychiatrists can decide whether a person has a mental illness, and only judges can decide whether a person is of unsound mind. And the concepts are also very different. I can have a mental illness, I can have schizophrenia, I can have psychosis, and I can still be of sound mind. Okay? And I can not have any mental illness and still be of unsound mind. Can you give me an example of this? Sorry? If you're drunk. So why are you of unsound mind if you're drunk? You're not able to make a rational decision. Yeah. Sorry? Yes. So if you're high on drugs or medication or you have delirium, right? You can be of unsound mind because you are not in a position to understand the rational consequences of your action. How is it that a person with schizophrenia can be of sound mind or a severe mental illness?
Where a schizophrenic person who is a researcher who gets a Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
That is a person who has schizophrenia.
Who is this? This person's very famous.
Yeah, I don't remember his name.
There's another film called A Beautiful Mind.
Beautiful Mind,
Yes.
yeah. Beautiful Mind.
John Nash,
John
who
Nash,
came up
yeah.
with the game theory.
Yes.
He had severe schizophrenia, and yet he came up with the game theory. So that's an example. Somebody raised their hand over here. Somebody want? Yeah. Yes, ma'am. How is that? Can you explain? How is it that a person who has undergone a traumatic event can be of unsound mind?
So basically, so they have a high emotionality at the moment. They are not able to think about things rationally. And so, yeah, basically trauma affects you mentally. Even if it does not go into a mental illness, at that moment of time, you are affected.
So is being affected by something the same as not being able to rationally understand what is happening? Is there a difference between the two?
There is a difference, but they can,
They can.
Yeah.
They can overlap, but not necessarily
Yeah.
that they will overlap.
Yeah.
So I'm not from the mental health field, but I've been working for about 5 years. So yesterday I was at a conference where people were really challenging mental health narratives, and I was surprised because I met someone who is diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and the way the person was really describing a very volatile situation between her and another person who was working with her, I felt that she was emotionally more aware what's really happening, how her behavior is really landing on the other person. So which made me feel that I think most of us are not even aware. So somewhere a person who's going through something that's severe, they also build this level of self-awareness. So I don't know if a term like sound mind can really, how do we really look at this? Yeah. Just thought I'd just put this out in the audience. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
so I was just coming to that. So unsound mind is not defined, nor is sound mind defined in the context of mental illness. But there is another concept which some of you might be aware of, which is known as capacity or decisional capacity, right? So your capacity, your mental capacity to make decisions, right? To be in a position to be able to make decisions. Now, mental capacity is again, it's a clinical concept, okay? And the Mental Health Care Act talks about it, but I'll quickly summarize it because it's come up now. There are different ways of assessing mental capacity, okay? And this is important from a rights point of view, and I'll tell you why. There have been largely 3 approaches to determining mental capacity, okay? The first has been what we call a status approach. That अगर आपको mental illness है, आपको schizophrenia है, psychosis है, severe clinical depression है, मतलब आपके पास capacity नहीं है. Means you're not in a position to make your decisions. You're irrational. There is that understanding, right, that people with mental illnesses are irrational. Have you heard of this myth? That you can't make your own decisions, so somebody has to make it on your behalf. That is the status approach. Then there is an outcomes approach, which says that if you have a mental illness and you make a wrong decision, which the doctor or the mental health professional or the family member thinks it's a wrong decision, then you lack capacity. Because you have a mental illness, insight नहीं है तो मतलब capacity नहीं है. ये तो देखो दवाई के लिए ना बोल रहे हैं. This person doesn't want to take medication, but they have severe hallucinations. Clearly, this person lacks capacity. So, the propriety of the decision, in the eyes of the judgment of the person who is a duty bearer, let's put it that way, will determine whether the person has capacity or not. That's the outcomes approach. The third approach is called the functional approach, which is what's being currently adopted in India under the Mental Health Care Act, which looks at 3 aspects. First is, to make any decision, do you have the necessary information? Do you understand the necessary information required to make that decision? Second is, are you in a position to reasonably foresee the consequences of making your decision or not? Right? So first of all, do I have all of the information to decide whether or not I want medication? Second is, am I able to decide that if I take medication, this is what is going to happen or not happen? Or if I don't take medication, this is what is going to happen or not going to happen? And the third element is that I should be able to communicate my decision through any means. Doesn't have to be by talking. It can be by gesture, by drawing, by writing, by indicating. It can be in any way. If these 3 elements are there in a person, then it means that they have the capacity to make decisions. Okay? Now, these are 3 elements which, in the context of capacity, are seen as cognitive decision-making processes. It does not matter whether I have the right kind of insight or if I have if I am making a wrong decision or a right decision. The point is that, am I able to arrive at a decision? If I can arrive at the decision, irrespective of whether it's right or wrong, it means I have capacity. And then there will be some situations where I might not be able to arrive at a decision on my own. I need somebody's help. I need my family member or the doctor to sit me down and say, अच्छा Arjun, अगर तुम्हें ये symptoms हो रहे हैं और तुमने ये दवाई ली तो ये होगा. You'll get better. But if you choose not to take medication, your recovery might be slower, but then you can take therapy. So, telling me what the risks are, what are the benefits, what are the alternatives, I might need that assistance, that support, after which I can make a decision. I might not be able to do it on my own because of my condition. I might have impaired decision-making skills. So capacity should always be assessed in the context of whether the person has been given the support they need to be able to make that decision. In India, that's not followed. I'm going to say it very clearly. You are mental health professionals in this room. I have to say it, that in India, we don't follow this practice. Okay? We don't look at whether we usually follow an outcomes or a status approach. That is the hard reality in our country, right? And across the world also. Yes. The addiction centers, hospitals, mental health hospitals, forced, so many situations, right? So this is what happens. Now, there is a critique of the functional approach also. I'm not going to get into that because I don't have time, okay? Because there is one line of critique says that any kind of capacity assessment is discriminatory because you are assessing a person based on their disability or you're discriminating them. But that's the other extreme of the debate. Will not get into it. I'm just letting you know if you want to read further. There is another line to say that even any kind of capacity assessment is a discriminatory move. And if you want more on this, look at the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I've not gone into it right now because I don't have time. But there is the CRPD Committee General Comment 14, I think, or General Comment 1, where they have actually explained the concept of capacity and why it's problematic. Okay? Not everybody has that point of view. Let me just put that, yeah.
I just want to say that what happens actually if we deconstruct it in a way that why children are not allowed to enter into contract, what they lack, which adults have.
Yeah.
Just deconstruct it.
Yeah.
And then how you put the age limit, that 18, that after this age, almost everybody means most of the society will be in the position to take their decisions.
Yeah.
So actually that is the very simple way of doing that, what children lack, which adults have, which make them capable of taking decisions. So that is actually one approach I just
good example.
About.
That 18, so the law of majority in India is 18. No, if you're 18, suddenly something changes magically inside and I become this adult who can make my own decisions. It's random, it's arbitrary. I frankly don't know why 18, why not 17, why not 19. There has been a push to move from 18 to 16. Some countries it's 16 also for certain things, especially when we talk around consent to enter into sexual relationships, things like that. It's random, right? I have seen far more mature adolescents under 18 than I have seen people above 40 in my life. It's a fact, especially men, yeah? So it's a fact, So I don't have a clear answer to your question in that sense. I think we have a law and sometimes we have to follow that law. And there have been instances where that has been critiqued in the context of the Juvenile Justice Act. Say if an adolescent commits a crime, a serious crime, should he be prosecuted as an adult at the age of 16? Now, a lot of child rights groups have said if a person is below 18 or even 16, they should not be prosecuted as an adult. But there is another line to say that, okay, if you commit a really severe crime, then, and this really happened after the Nirbhaya case. If all of you are aware, there was a lot of reforms for criminal law and all of that, but there is still a divided opinion. I don't want to get into it, that's another day. Yeah, so
what are the legitimate state interests in defining everything?
Yes.
So I think everything comes down to that.
It comes down, and so this is again it's a very packed concept. Legitimate state interest is a constitutional law concept. I don't want to get into it, but it also has to be seen critically. Well, often, what is legitimate state interest is what society thinks, and we very well know what society thinks at a majoritarian level is not always the best thing. We're seeing that in this country right now. Anyway, moving on. So is all of this clear? One last important point is to complete the loop. When a person is denied or being certified as lacking capacity to make mental health care treatment decisions, that results in a violation of their rights. Because the moment you say, I am irrational, I cannot make my own decisions, you are violating my, which one? You only brought up that point. My autonomy. My freedom, Article 21, personal liberty, to make my own decisions about things that matter to me. Which means, in India's context, in a context where mental illness is equated with unsound mind, if I have a mental illness, I can't enter into a contract, I can't buy and sell property, I can't marry, I cannot have children. The Hindu Marriage Act and the Special Marriage Act even today have specific provisions which say that if a person has a mental illness and they are not fulfilling their duties as a spouse, whatever that means, that can be a ground for divorce. There is also another provision which says that if you have a mental illness and it's so severe that you cannot procreate, then that is a ground, then you're not valid for marriage. You're not qualified for marriage. This is very much there and it has implications. The center, CMHLP did a study a few years ago of the Pune courts, the family courts, and we looked at judgments. I was not part of that study, but the center looked at different kinds of judgments from the family courts on divorce proceedings, divorce petitions. And it was found that a higher proportion of the petitions were filed by the husbands against their wives on the grounds of mental illness. And in a majority of those petitions, there was no evidence provided of mental illness. It was just claimed that she's not fulfilling, she's not a good spouse, she's not agreeing what the family wants, she's बहुत लड़ती है, झगड़ती है, बहुत बोलती है, all of the typical kind of things, right? So this is a reality that mental, it's just not what I'm saying in theory. Your laws very clearly today, even if you look at the right to vote, if you're unsound mind, you can't vote. And the problem is that mental illness is equated with unsound mind. So the moment you have mental illness, the court's like, acha, they are of unsound mind, so, so it's a cycle, yeah.
That mental illness and having a mental disorder are two different things. So can we say that having a mental disorder can be framed under unsound mind?
How are the two different? How are you
so because for disorder you need a proper diagnostic also from like DSM we can say, and usually if you are diagnosed you are said to be that unsound mind, so
okay, so mental illness and disorder is they usually used interchangeably. Okay, the Mental Health Care Act uses the phrase mental illness and it's defined what is a mental illness. Usually disorder, illness are used interchangeably, and there is also politics behind what is illness, what is a disorder. There is that whole set of debates which you might look at in this conference or later on. So for now, what I would say is that they're used interchangeably, and I'll come to what the Mental Care Act says about diagnosing a mental illness. Okay. The other important point of the relationship between rights and mental illness is we touched upon forced admissions, treatments, right? All kinds of unfair practices which violate human rights in hospitals. How many of you know of the Erwadi tragedy? How many of you don't know about it? Okay, so can someone please in a minute explain what is the Erwadi tragedy? Who wants to do it? Who would like to do it? Come on. Anybody? No? Okay, fine. You want to take it, Hitesh? Do you want to explain?
So there is a place in South India, Irvadi, where I guess around 30 years back, this incident happened where a lot of people who, mental illness jinko hua tha. So they were tied with the beds just so they cannot escape the place. Prison bolo usko. So at that place, I guess at midnight, आग लग गई थी काफ़ी, and the people out there, the caregivers, let's say the staff, they ran, और वो वहीं पे चल के, yeah. So that's my knowledge about the Ayurvedic.
Thank you, Udesh. So this happened in a dargah in Tamil Nadu, and I think in 2001, if I'm not wrong, where about 27 to 30 persons with mental illness were chained, and their fire broke out. They were not able to escape. They burned to death. Okay, and then there was a lot of outrage that happened. The case went to the Supreme Court. The NHRC, the National Human Rights Commission, issued a report. The Supreme Court monitored the whole process, etc., etc. So there was a whole thing that happened. Cut to 2017-18, there was another petition which was filed by this advocate called Gaurav Kumar Bansal in the Supreme Court, where in Badaयूं in UP, there was another dargah where people with mental illness were still being chained. So this happened in 2001, we're talking about 2017, so clearly this is an example, nothing has changed, and this is being done even in our hospitals a few kilometers away from here also, okay? I'm not going to take names, but you know what I'm referring to. So this is the reality, right? So I'll give you another example. Mental Health Care Act bans the use of unmodified electroconvulsive therapy. Do you know what is unmodified and modified electroconvulsive therapy? No, okay, I'll tell you. Unmodified electroconvulsive therapy is when you provide ECT without anesthesia and muscle relaxants. The Mental Health Care Act in 2017 came out and said that unmodified ECT is banned. You can only provide ECT or modified ECT with anesthesia and muscle relaxants. There is a petition in the Bombay High Court, which has been filed by the Indian Psychiatric Society challenging this provision, saying, why are you taking away our right to do unmodified ECT? Okay? This is all in the public domain, and I have to say this. Okay, even if there are psychiatrists here, it's fine. It's important for us to understand that there are still all kinds of practices happening in our psychiatric hospitals where human rights violations are taking place on a daily basis. Right? And that's why you need a law which regulates mental health care and treatment in India, which ensures that mental health care and treatment is provided on a rights, using a rights-based approach, right? Okay, now I'm going to run through some of the provisions because I'm running out of time. So I'm just going to tell you some of the key provisions which you should know, and then there are enough resources for you to look into to understand this in more detail. We prepared a whole manual on the Mental Health Care Act for practitioners, which actually breaks down the law. We also have an app called the MHCA 2017 app, which simplifies all these things. Very quickly, the Act says that mental illness can only be determined in accordance with internationally recognized acceptable medical standards, which the government has notified. And in India's case, it's mostly the ICD, or the International Classification of Diseases. Any determination, it doesn't use the word diagnosis, it uses the word determination, because a determination could be done either for treatment, but it could be done under any other law which requires that determination. So for instance, if I have to get a disability certificate because I have a mental illness, I might have to go under the Disabilities Act and file for that, for which I will need a determination of mental illness. So the law says you can't do a determination unless a law requires you to do that determination. And why is that the case? Can you tell me why? Labeling, okay, excellent. Stigma, excellent. Stereotyping, excellent. So to prevent the misuse of diagnosis, right, which happens rampantly in our country, the law is very clear in saying that if the law requires determination, you will do one, otherwise you will not, you can't. It also says that mental illness cannot be determined based on 3 criteria. One is your status, membership, or identity with any group. Give me an example. Sorry? Caste or gender, sexuality. Non-conformity with prevailing beliefs or with any community, or beliefs or values in any community. Can you give me an example? not visiting a temple, marrying outside my caste, etc., etc., and past treatment or hospitalization. So, just because I was hospitalized in the past doesn't mean I have an illness today. Okay? That's a relevant factor, but you will still have to make a determination today to see whether or not I have an illness. Okay, I've already explained what is capacity, right? We are clear on that. Important change that the law is saying is that it is presuming that every person has capacity. So there is a presumption that every person has capacity. If this has to be disproved, or if the mental professional feels otherwise, they have to do a capacity assessment and prove that the person lacks capacity. So that's one very important shift that the law has made. That it's created a presumption that सबके पास capacity है. अगर आपको लगता है नहीं है, आप दिखाइए. Burden is not on the patient to prove. It's on the mental health professional. Having a mental illness, we've already discussed, does not mean that you lack capacity. Making a wrong decision does not mean you lack capacity. And if you're given enough support, you can exercise capacity even though you might not be able to on your own. Okay? Now, what is the meaning? What is the implication of capacity? It means that if I have capacity, then you will have to take my informed consent before giving me any treatment. It's as simple as that. Okay? Which means that I give this consent of my own free will after I have had enough information about the risks, benefits, alternatives to that treatment decision. Okay? Usually in hospitals, you go and they give you a consent form and say sign. That's not informed consent. That is not consent. Informed consent means somebody sits down with you and explains everything, and after that you make that decision. And consent also means, most importantly, the right to refuse. But what's the point of taking consent if you can't say no, right? So consent actually means refusing. Advanced directives. Now, so what the law is also trying to do is that it's trying to ensure that whatever treatment I get is in accordance with my will and preferences and my desires. Now, this is the first time Indian law, well, not the first time, the Supreme Court has already done it in another context, and I'll come to that. But what the law is saying is that if in the future I have a mental illness, or anybody has a mental illness, and I lose capacity, and I'm not being able to make my own decisions, I can write an advance directive, and I can say that in such a situation, this is how I should be treated, and this is how I should be cared for, or this is now how I should not be treated. That is an advance directive. It has a legal value. So basically anybody can write it down. There is a format to writing an advance directive. We'll share that with you. Get it registered with the nearest mental health review board. That is a legal document. A mental health professional is legally obligated to provide treatment as per a registered advance directive. Okay? If they have a problem with that, they can go to the review board and challenge the advance directive. But till it is struck down or changed, they have to comply with what the advance directive actually says. So this is an example. If I have a mental illness and I'm not in the condition to make decisions, I wish to be admitted in a hospital close to family home, I want my food to be cooked at home, if I'm in a lot of pain, distress, I should be given medicines to calm me, even if I don't give permission in that moment. And I don't want to be administered lithium because of its side effects. I don't want visitors to come to the hospital to meet me, blah, blah, blah. At all times, my mother will be the one who will support me and make my decisions on my behalf. Okay? The next tool that the advance directive gives to protect autonomy is a nominated representative. Now, again, everybody in this room can have a nominated representative. You just have to simply write it on a piece of paper, and the person has to consent. They have to be above 18. They obviously have to be in a position to be, they have to be competent to be a nominated representative, and they have to consent to it. Now, the role of a nominated representative is to represent a person with mental illness in all matters of their treatment and care, to make decisions on their behalf if the person can't make a decision, to give informed consent, and provide whatever support that the person requires. Okay? I can appoint anybody as my nominated representative. This is particularly useful for which kind of people? It can apply to anyone, it's just not about genetic. But the fact that I can appoint anyone as my NR, yeah, what does that mean? Exactly. It does not have to be a family member. It can be it can be a friend, it can be a lover, it can be anybody else who I trust. It can be an NGO representative. Especially families where persons are experiencing violence, people who come from queer families, queer people who come from families where they've been abandoned or they're being forcefully admitted for conversion treatments, so on and so forth. Right? So this is a particularly important provision for such folks. If you have not appointed an NR, then there is a default list. Say if I have an illness, I've not appointed an NR, say I'm a homeless person and I come to a hospital, who's going to be my NR? So there is a default list which the law provides. It says, first you see whether there's an advance directive and a person has been nominated there. Agar wo nahi hai, then is there a relative? Relative nahi hai, is there a caregiver? If there's no caregiver, then the Mental Health Review Board has to appoint somebody. If the MHRB can't find someone, then go to the Department of Social Welfare and ask for a representative from there. Apart from this, any representative of a registered NGO working with people with mental illness can also be an NR on a temporary basis. So it's okay if you don't have anyone in your life. You can have somebody from Muktaa Charitable Foundation can come and become your nominated representative. I'm just kidding. I'm just giving an example, right? Right? Okay, I'm going to skip the different kinds of admissions. There's independent, which is I come and say I want to be admitted, and there's supported admissions where I'm being admitted without my consent. But this can be done in only exceptional circumstances, and there have to be certain criteria which are fulfilled. There are a lot of regulatory requirements in order to ensure a supported admission. The mental health review boards monitor this to ensure that no person has been unnecessarily admitted against their consent. So the law is actually very expressly, there is a provision saying that we need to move towards deinstitutionalization and community living, which is why forced admissions have to be in exceptional circumstances as the last resort and when this is the least restrictive alternative for that person's recovery and treatment. Okay? You look up the law, the manual and the app, it will tell you what these criteria are. I'm not going to get into that. Very quickly, just going to touch upon the rights and I'll end with that. So there are two kinds of categories of rights recognized in the Mental Health Care Act. The first is the right to access mental health care and treatment. So the first time in India, you have a pan-India legislation which is recognizing the right to access mental health care and treatment, which means there is a duty on the state to provide some basic mental health services which are affordable, good quality, in sufficient quantity, and provided without discrimination. These services include IPD, OPD, halfway home, sheltered accommodation, supported accommodation. So this is a recognition of the right to get treatment in your community and not in the hospital. So for the first time, the law is actually saying you need to have rehabilitation homes. You need to have halfway homes where people can recover in the community. Services for caregivers. So you need to have mental health services for caregivers. You need to have hospital and community-based rehabilitation, including home-based rehabilitation services. So somebody wants to get treated in their homes, then those services should be provided. And lastly, it recognizes children and geriatrics as two vulnerable groups for which specific services must be provided. Free care for people below the poverty line, free medicines on the essential drugs list. In every state, there is this list. Reimbursement. So if there is no government service in my locality and I have to go to a private place, I can be reimbursed for that. Emergency services such as ambulances, and ensuring that there are services all the way in the villages up to the sub-health centers, primary health centers, community health centers. So mental health care has to be provided through the public health system and not just in big hospitals. There's a right to equality and non-discrimination, which means that you can't discriminate between people with physical illness and mental illness. There's a right to medical insurance, which means, this is very important, very, very important, that all medical insurance policies being provided to people with physical illnesses should be provided in the same manner to people with mental illness. So what used to happen in our insurance policies, that mental illness used to be an exclusion criteria. The law is now saying you remove that exclusion criteria, and those policies are applicable to people with mental illness as they are applicable to people with physical illnesses. There's a right to information. So why am I being admitted? Under what provision? What is my diagnosis? What kind of treatment am I being provided? I have a right to access medical records, so I can see my medical records. And if the mental professional thinks that no, disclosing this might cause harm to you or someone else, then they can disclose that, but then the person can go to the Mental Health Review Board and file an application saying they're withholding my medical records. Right to confidentiality, there are exceptions which I'm sure all of you know, and these exceptions are laid down. Right to community living. So if I have been abandoned or my family is not taking care of me, I have a right to legal aid to enforce my right to live in the community or with my family. And if my family is still not taking me, the government has to ensure that there is a halfway home or a sheltered accommodation where I can be taken care of independently. Right to protection from cruel, inhuman, degrading treatment. This is how hospitals, the kind of services they're providing, infrastructure, quality, those kinds of things. Right to legal aid. So every person has a right to a lawyer in case they want to get out of hospital or they feel they've been unfairly admitted or illegally admitted. I can complain against any deficiencies in services. So if I'm not happy with the hospital's food, like ye bakwas khana de rahe mujhe, I can file a complaint first to the hospital. After that, if I'm not happy, I can go to the review board. And if I'm still not happy, I can go to the State Mental Health Authority and file that complaint. What are treatments which are prohibited? ECT, which is unmodified. Forced sterilization of men and women as a form of mental health care treatment. Banned. Chaining in whatever form is completely banned. Physical restraints can only be with the psychiatrist's approval and they have to be proportionate, and there are some regulatory steps to be taken to physically restrain somebody in a particular moment. And solitary confinement and seclusion is also banned. Lastly, your MHRBs are your first port of call. If any patient's rights have been violated, they can go to the Mental Health Review Board and file an application or a complaint. The board has 6 members, a district judge, a representative of the district magistrate or the collector, a psychiatrist, a medical practitioner, and for the first time, 2 representatives of any of the following: persons with mental illness, caregivers, and NGOs working in mental health. Right? So 6 members, each of them has a vote. They collectively will make a decision, and the order of a review board is like that of a judicial order. It has to be complied with. It is a legal order, right? Similarly, if as a mental health professional you feel that something cannot be done, or the patient is making an unreasonable claim, or the advance directive has to be challenged, or there's no nominated representative, or whatever it is, even a mental health professional, a caregiver, a family member can go to the review board and file an application for anything related to the person's treatment, or if the person's rights have been violated. On top of the MHRB, every state has a state mental health authority which oversees the implementation of the act. If you have any problem with the MHRB or anything else, or with the way hospitals are providing services, you can go to the SMHA also. I'm going to stop here. Thank you. Questions? Do we have time for questions, or we're...
No, actually we have crossed
okay,
the time.
fine,
Sorry.
fine. You can, I'm here for another 20 minutes, so I'm happy to answer questions. Yeah.
Before we begin our next session, I'll request Hitesh and Dr. Rupa to felicitate Mr. Arjun Kapoor.